before getting to this chapter, Fairy Tale 100 Years Quest, Chapter 25, I want to make it very clear I'm not that happy about the chapter, but at the same time, I'm all right with it. It's a kind of a weird way to explain it. It's like I'm salty that what we got, but I'm not that salty that we got it. And again, I'll explain it in a moment. I can get through this chapter really quickly because there wasn't a whole lot to it. This video is more about my explanation of why I understand where people are not too happy about it, but they shouldn't be because of a specific reason. And let's just get to the chapter already and the obvious things. They're going to Tekka City. They're going over to get to the train and get to Drasil, where they're looking for information on the Wood Dragon God Alderaan. And during that, they run into a little bit of commotion when all these other characters see Urza, and they think that she's a completely different character. They think that she's some girl named Urkis, or Erkis, however that would be pronounced. And it turns out that in this town there is a guild called Fairy Nail, where it has a lot of characters with very, very strong similarities, but wildly different spins on something about them that the main characters and the members of the Fairy Tale Guild have. This chapter, again, I expected something like this at some point. I wasn't too sure, but as my only complaint will be after this chapter, in reality, if any of this continues, because this chapter was, and I don't think there was anything really other than that as a goofy chapter, like comedic in between arc chapter, because usually in between story arcs, there's one or two chapters where we get more of comedic, silly things that don't really matter, that just characters having some jokes. And I feel like there was somewhat of a callback, not just in the fact that it was mentioned, but in the idea of it from early in the series. What was it, between I believe it was between Phantom Lord and Tower of Heaven, where they had the whole play part of the series, or they all went to act in a play, and it just went all wrong because remember the fairy tale there. They end up getting into a big enough commotion, and it wasn't like the issue with that. Also, is with this is it wasn't an extra chapter. It feels like an extra chapter. You just get a +1 where it's like entirely silly, nothing too important to the plot, but just something that maybe you could read for chuckles or fan service to an extra degree or whatever it is. And that's probably why people are a little bit salty about this one, is because it was 2 weeks. It was, the 2-week wait. I feel like if this was just weekly, people would be like, okay, whatever, we'll wait till next week. I think it's just because the 2 weeks you waited for this, and then this was the chapter we got, where even though it's entertaining, but it isn't pushing the plot forward, and there's nothing really to it that enhances the story. It's not only that, because we have to wait another 2 weeks until we get more. So it's just people being impatient, which I can get, especially when you have to wait 2 weeks. I mean, granted, there are a lot of people that don't pay for the chapters, don't spend money on them. So I mean, you don't really have too much to complain about when you're getting it for free, but I can still understand why they'd be upset in general. And there was good comedy in this. This chapter was funny. I like that, like, they took similar things that all the characters already have and just kind of like warped them. And they all had very slightly different names. You had like the guy who was I'm just going to call them all Pseudo and then their name, because really there's no reason to even know these characters' names. I doubt they're going to be relevant after this chapter, and I'm hoping they're not relevant after this chapter. You have Pseudo Natsu and Pseudo Lucy. Pseudo Natsu is an actor, and Pseudo Lucy's his manager, and he kind of is rude to her, but it's really only kind of like he only acts that way. They're actually like a couple, and they get lewd all the time apparently. Pseudo Gorei and Pseudo Julia are both strippers. Which I thought that was genuinely pretty funny. You had like Pseudo Wendy is just an actress who's really good at changing her expressions. You had Pseudo Carla, who's just a cat lover with Pseudo Cappy, Pseudo Happy's literally just a cat, as well as Pseudo Lily. You know, Pseudo Gadgil and Pseudo Levy are a married singing couple. The only one this was kind of weird was Pseudo Elfman, because I saw people like wondering if this was in somehow a relation to the Wood Dragon God. And, you know, he could see into hearts, and maybe this is like them looking into something about them that, you know, they haven't realized yet. I thought that initially as well, but I don't know how it would make sense with Elfman, because Pseudo Elfman is straight like, he looks like he's borderline gonna like transition to be a woman and whatnot. But that would make sense because there's literally no reason for Elfman at any point in the story to ever be like that. It wouldn't make sense. I feel like, again, it's just for jokes. I did think legitimately it was funny that Pseudo Loki was just a straight porn star, and Wendy was wondering what that was, and they're like, Lucy's just like, we don't need to know what that is. Let's just keep walking. Legitimately, I thought that was pretty good. But I mean, the only really things left in the story, you know, they have near the end, Pseudo Urza ends up being the one with them on the train, and Urza actually stays behind to do the play, and actually do a reference to when they did the play chapter early in the series, which again, I feel like it was a callback to that chapter, because there's been a lot of stuff within 100 Years Quest that feels like, you know, slight nods to early Fairy Tail, which is good. But the fact that I have with the problem with this chapter is not that just there was nothing large in the plot, but there was nothing really to talk about, which again, there was maybe a little bit of the fact that Gray, you know, after hearing that some of the people have romantic relationships, he thought about Juvia while talking about a romantic relationship. And we don't know how much they've progressed in the year between Alvarez and now, but clearly there is development. If he's, you know, he's got that look on his face and he is thinking clearly romantically about Juvia. So at least there's that, but there's nothing really to talk about beyond that. And there's the possibility that maybe Pseudo Urza and Urza switching, maybe Toka runs into Pseudo Urza and drains her magic or something. Legitimately, this chapter could have been made perfectly fine, as if on some point while they're on the train, they showed that that Toka's on the train. And then even with this whole chapter, you could be like, oh, hell, Toka is on there. Maybe they're going to have a confrontation after this chapter. No, it was just entirely a goofy chapter, which, again, the reason why I'm salty about this chapter and I'm not too happy about it is the fact that there's nothing really to talk about. The last two chapters weren't exciting, but they were wrapping up of the previous story arc and setting up stuff in the future. Even though it was very quiet, you got a lot of important character interactions, a lot of small like things that you can kind of look at. You know, like some of the things I talked about, like theorizing each of the three remaining dragon gods and what they're like, and maybe something that we'll see with them. The contrast and parallels of Magia Dragon and Diablos, my growing suspicions of Eleftheria and whatnot. There was a lot of stuff to talk about, even though they weren't that exciting. Whereas this chapter, there's nothing really to go off of. You can kind of look at like Gray maybe seemingly having progressed romantic relations with Juvia. I mean, that's more of like oh cool, things are moving forward with them. But there's nothing really to discuss with that. And why I'm okay with why I'm not okay with this, again, obviously, I like to talk about stuff that I enjoy, and there was not much to really talk about this, so it's going to be 2 weeks of not really having anything to talk about the main story. I got stuff I really want to kind of go over from the past, but at the same time, it's always enjoyable to, you know, talk about things moving forward. But why I'm okay with this is chapter 25 of 100 Years Quest, and chapters so far 1 through 24 have been entirely straightforward. We haven't got a lot of like content where it just feels like, well, I wrote out 10 pages of this chapter as important. What do I do for the remaining like 6 pages? And then there's just 6 pages of stuff that doesn't really matter, and it's just kind of there. Which again, everything we really have gotten is like very following to, here's the story, here's progression of plot, here's what's going on. there hasn't really been anything to where it's like, why is this happening right now in the arc? These pages should be used for, something important. And the fact it's known that we get, because it's very normal for weekly manga especially, and it's a lot of shonen in general, but especially weekly manga. In between arcs, you'll usually get a little bit of content where it's just like fun, goofy, or maybe something just for literally just to add some extra time between transitioning from an arc to an arc. We just had this big debate. We just had the last arc. We had all these crazy action and all these reveals and things set up to move forward. So having a chapter to kind of like very much distinguish, this is a point where they're just going to be doing something fun between this chapter and the next one. All right, where I'll be fine with it. The huge defining line for me though will be the next chapter, because if none of it is related, like, okay, Urza and her got switched, they're back on the train, maybe somehow they went back, got Urza, and managed to move her in time. That'll be okay, and they just kind of like forget about Fairy Nail and Tekka City, and that whole funny, silly chapter. Or is if this somehow plays into the plot, and not the whole guild, just the fact that you have an Urza look-alike and Urza switched, and maybe Toka has to do something with it. I don't know. I don't want to spend any more time though on these lookalikes. It could easily get confusing, having these characters around, and it just kind of, as it is right now, and where I would like it to stay, is just a silly chapter where one and done. There's been funny stuff like this before that Hiromishima's done, assuming he was the one that wrote this out and not Ueda. We don't know. I mean, there's like back in Rave Master, there's a whole chapter where Hiroshima and his editor have look-alike characters within it, where they're writing, where he gets in trouble for getting too close to the deadline as he's writing a manga about the adventures of what's going on in the story. It was a completely goofy, self-aware chapter, and those kind of things are fine as long as this chapter doesn't carry on to the next one. I don't want to get like multiple chapters hanging out and doing stuff with Fairy Nail and these lookalikes. I don't want that. I'm perfectly okay as if the next chapter they just kind of say like, man, that was weird, and then just it's not important anywhere forward. Again, then this chapter I'm salty with because we didn't get to talk about much. There wasn't really anything to go off of. I think this is the first time you guys have heard me talk about something with Fairy Tail that's very fresh and that I'm unhappy about. But again, at the same time of being happy, I'm kind of like, it's not a big deal. It's purely the weight, I feel like, that people are salty about, which I can get, because even though I get the chapter, I get why we're waiting, or I get why we got this, and I get why it's not a big deal given like the amount we've gotten so far of this. This is the only chapter so far we gotten since this came back out of a goofy, silly chapter that just seems like almost filler. And again, not a big deal if it's just the one. It's the fact that you waited 2 weeks and now we gotta wait another 2 weeks. I think it's just purely the time thing. If it was weekly, I doubt anyone would be as salty as they are now. And again, I'm fairly salty about it, I will admit. So it's not like I'm trying to like rag on people who are disappointed that we got a not important chapter after waiting 2 weeks just to wait another 2 weeks. So I'll just leave it at that. It just kind of bothers me, but if the next chapter is another one of these, you will hear me actually mad, because going a straight month of this kind of content will in fact rile me up with legit anger and upset, rather than just, damn it, like I gotta wait another 2 weeks until we find out what Toka and the Wood Dragon God and Diablos are all up to. I don't think so, because they already said it's only 8 hours to get to Drasil. I feel like they're going to be there after this chapter. And whether or not there's something with the fact that the Urza's got switched, I don't know. Maybe she'll stay behind and end up running to Toka, and then she'll find out about her and there'll be information on her or something. I don't know. If it has something to do with plot, I will be okay with this chapter moving forward, more so. But as it is now, it's just like, okay, whatever. Okay, I'll read it for the chuckles, There's some legit laughs in this, but otherwise, it's not that important of a chapter. It could be, moving forward, it could be, there could be something that happens plot-wise, again, Toka's on her way, that could relate into this. I don't know, we'll see. Other than that, drop a comment below on what you think about this chapter, what you thought about all this, and what part did you think was funny? I thought the fact that, Gray being, the pseudo Gray being just a male stripper, I thought that was pretty funny. I thought that was legit funny, and then the whole porn star scene with Wendy trying to figure out what that was, I thought that was goofy, but pretty hilarious. But anyway, I'd really appreciate if you would thumbs up the video, press the like button and the subscribe button, and check out my other videos. But other than that, I appreciate everyone who's already subscribed, and I thank y'all for listening. Bye.